I'm Nate McGaha, Executive Director of Arts North Carolina. This video will review Arts North Carolina's legislative requests for North Carolina General Assembly in 2022, and also review some of the resources available to help you in your advocacy meetings. Arts North Carolina has many resources available to help you speak with your legislator and also to train other advocates. We have a wide variety of training videos covering everything from scheduling meetings to actually having the meetings, as well as a longer advocacy 101 session. There's also the Leave Behind, which we're going to go over in more detail on this video, as well as fact sheets that you can see there about the more specifics about the nonprofit arts industry and information there, and lots of additional arts and arts education resources. We also have a mobile site, and you can see that to the left side of your screen there, some of the screenshots from that. I encourage you and all of your advocates that you might be working with to bookmark that to your home screen and use that as an app, especially if you're going to be coming to Legislative Day at the North Carolina General Assembly in Raleigh. It really is designed with maps and information and scheduling and all of the research and data that you need in order to effectively advocate at the North Carolina General Assembly, as well as a feature to report your visits that day right there on your phone. So please check out that mobile app as well. So our legislative request, we have created this document that can be printed out on 8.5 by 11 if you happen to be having in-person meetings in your home district. The links on these slides will take you directly to that document so that you can print it out. And this is going to list our primary legislative asks for the 2022 session and provide some information, some additional facts and figures to sort of put that into context and for you to use with your legislators. Make sure that you email the document to the legislator before and after the meeting as a follow-up, and certainly print it out if you're going to be having those in-person meetings. Arts NC is going to create a two-sided version that'll be on a card that'll be available on June 7th for the Legislative Day in Raleigh. So we've got you covered if you're coming to Raleigh on June 7th, but if you're meeting in your home district, you will have to print your own out. This only provides the data and the requests, but the stories that you provide, the connection you have to the arts, your experiences with art students and art lovers and artists, that's really the heart and soul of your advocacy, and that's what you're going to need to bring to the table. This document is really just a tool. You'll notice that right at the top of the document, we are thanking our General Assembly members for the massive amount of support that we've seen over the pandemic. Talking about CARES Act funding in 2020 and how vital that was to saving arts jobs and cultural institutions across the state. Talking about the American Rescue Plan Act funding that we recognized and that we're going to see invested, this one-time investment over the next 2 years that's going to be really important for sustainable growth and resiliency. Notice that we are not talking about the numbers. We're not talking about how much funding we got from the CARES Act or how much funding we got from ARPA. And the reason for that is that we've seen in other states that talking too much about the federal funding that came to the arts institutions can disincentivize state legislators from investing state dollars in the current session and in the current fiscal year. So we want to be very grateful for those investments of federal dollars, stressing that they were one-time investments that helped deal with the impact of the pandemic, but that doesn't mean that we don't need more funding. But do stress that we really appreciate that the North Carolina General Assembly really stepped up to sustain local communities and economies through their investment in the arts. So our first request is that in November of 2021, the budget that they passed for this 2 years for both FY22 and FY23, in FY23, there was a one-time $1 million addition to the grassroots arts program. And we would like them to make that extra $1 million recurring every year. So in FY23, FY24, and on and on and on. So we don't have to continue making this request. Now, grassroots grants are very equitably distributed to every single one of 100 counties based on their population. So it's an equitable formula that gets state dollars out to every county in North Carolina. The local control of those dollars, the actual spending on the arts is not controlled at the state level. It is locally controlled. That local control of funding ensures that state investment meets the community needs. So it's not somebody in Raleigh telling the community what they need, but really the community deciding on its own arts needs. And that can be really important, particularly to rural legislators. That grassroots network was crucial to distributing state and federal funding, particularly during the pandemic. So continuing to invest in this program is going to be really important. So that's something you can talk to your legislator about, is that this network really needs to be sustained and maintained, because it's crucial to the work of the North Carolina Arts Council and how it supports the arts and culture industry statewide. And really stress that we need these funds to be recurring so that we can have reliable and sustainable economic growth, both in rural areas and in urban areas. So the fact that this is an equitable distribution, and this increase is so important to the work that happens all across the state, that we really need to make sure that these funds, that these additional funds are made recurring, so that we can have something that is both reliable and sustainable. Now, our second request is for the North Carolina General Assembly to restore $500,000 to North Carolina Arts Council grants. That additional $500,000 investment would actually return the general grants line to its 2008 funding levels. So this wasn't a pandemic cut. This was a recession cut that still, well over a decade later, almost 15 years later, still has not been restored. Now, general grants are crucial for targeted distribution of funding from the North Carolina General Assembly. So these dollars are going to where it's needed most: rural touring programs, as well as community development programs, statewide organization programs, arts institutions in counties all across the state, lots of different education programs that are happening all across the state. These dollars are crucial, providing operating and project support in both urban and rural areas to nonprofit arts organizations all across the state. So really stress that this is a statewide effort, that these dollars are being used so that the North Carolina Arts Council can really invest in projects and operating support where it's needed most. And it's been vital to have these sorts of investments, particularly as we move through the pandemic. And also stress that these dollars also, through locally led partnerships, are going to artists and keeping hundreds of independent artists across the state working in local communities. And those grants were really key also during the pandemic. And when we move on to some of the information we want to frame, we're going to bring up some figures about the arts and culture sector. And then this is both the for-profit and nonprofit arts and culture sector. And this comes from the Federal Bureau of Economic Analysis. So this is not just the nonprofit sector. There is a separate fact sheet that you can access for those specific numbers, but we're going to kind of talk about this more in terms of the nonprofit and for-profit larger arts and culture sector. Back in 2019, we were up to $17.2 billion of economic impact, which is 2.8% of the state's total GDP. That's a huge chunk for a single sector. Now, that dropped 4% in 2020 down to 16.5 billion, but it is worth noting that while it dropped in 2020, that economic impact didn't drop all the way. It didn't drop even down to 2018 levels. So it was important to note that 2020 obviously took a hit, but the overall economic impact, we're definitely rebuilding, we're opening up, and it's still going to be a vital player, but needs investment in order to continue that growth and continue that, not relief, but recovery at this point. And recovery and building a better North Carolina is really the name of the game. Now, employment is a slightly different story. Arts and culture sector employment was at over 127,000 in 2019. that's 2.6% of the total state employment, but that dropped. We lost a lot more employees than we did economic impact, dropped a full 9% in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. And there's a lot of hiring and there's a lot of rebuilding that's happening, but facing a labor shortage like every sector is all across the state and across the country, that's why it's so important that the General Assembly continue to make these sustainable investments so that we can plan and help to grow that labor force back to where it was in the years preceding. But we can see the chart shows that up until the pandemic, both of these, both the economic impact and employment were increasing year over year. So we are a growth industry in North Carolina, making up 2.5 to 3% of the GDP and total state employment. Also, it might be really great for you to point out to your legislator that on average, a attendee at an arts event is spending on average at $30.66 in addition to the cost of admission at local businesses such as hotels, retail stores, and restaurants. So really driving the local economy. And then when you start taking those numbers apart, 1 out of every 3 patrons to an arts and culture event are coming from another county or from out of state. And those individuals are spending twice as much as the locals from inside the county. Also, the arts are massive growth indicator and growth and with a correlation of growth for rural counties. Rural counties with performing arts organizations have 3 times more population growth, attract more workers and jobs, and provide higher incomes than those rural counties that don't have performing arts organizations. So an investment in the arts is really an investment in an economy. And it's also great when you're having these conversations to talk about the North Carolina Arts Council, because they are the state body, the state agency that's distributing these funds. They have a 50-year legacy, over 50-year legacy now, of accountable, strategic, and equitable investment of taxpayer dollars through statewide grants for arts and culture and economic development. Overall, every grant dollar that gets invested through these Arts Council grants is matched at a rate of 17 other dollars to that $1 of state funding. So a really impressive return on investment for that legislative investment in the arts. Now, you might also want to check out the Arts NC website to see if your legislator and the legislator you're meeting with is a member of the Joint Caucus on Arts and Arts Education. The Joint Caucus on Arts and Arts Education is really members of the North Carolina General Assembly from both the House and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, coming together to learn more about the economic, educational, and civic impact of the arts, and really so that they can have a better understanding of the arts in the state. And if they want to, if they're not members and they want to join that caucus, feel free to connect them either to Arts North Carolina or to any one of the current caucus leaders, either Representative Carney or Elmore in the House, or Senator Sawyer or Woodard in the Senate. And so these folks have really been fantastic arts leaders throughout the pandemic and really for the last several years on all of our arts issues and also on coordinating the members of the Joint Caucus. Right now, our caucus in both last year and for 2022, 33 in the House, 20 in the Senate. You can see that's a pretty significant portion of the House and the Senate, with a more or less even split between Republicans and Democrats, actually considerably more Republicans than Democrats in the Senate with this 2-year cycle. And Arts NC, we really, our goals to educate the caucus are making sure that they understand the economic impact and value of the arts, both about the recovery and the nonprofit arts sector and creative industries as a whole. Obviously, we're talking about the grants and programs of the North Carolina Arts Programs, North Carolina Arts Council, so that they have a greater understanding of the funding that we're asking them for, and talking to the caucus and the larger General Assembly as well about arts education, comprehensive arts education, and student outcomes. We want to wish you all the best of luck with your advocacy efforts. But we also want to thank our sponsors for making Arts Day and really the work of Arts North Carolina possible all year long. You can see that there's a lot of nonprofit arts organizations all across the state that work to support Arts North Carolina and to support Arts Day and the very important work of arts advocacy. So we want to thank those sponsors. And I want to thank you for watching the video today and for all of the work and all of the conversations that you're going to have with your General Assembly members about our legislative request this year. Thank you so very much.